So we're going to look at these cases from the psychological perspective and from two different lenses, from the perpetrator, the person that carried out the act, and from the public's point of view, or from the person perceiving what they did and how they're judging them, how it makes them feel. So as we go through these, I want you to think about those two sides of the story. Think about the person that committed this. What drove them to do this impulsive act, this spur-of-the-moment thing, the crime of passion, as it would be called in today's media. What's the reason that they did this? Was it because of love? Was it because of money? Was it because of a love triangle, jealousy, rage, mental illness? What is it that caused it? And then look at it from the other point of view, the public, the journalist perspective. What do other people feel when they hear this story, when this type of crime happens? How do they perceive it? How do they judge the people that are doing it? So the crime of impulse, the crime of passion, the spur of the moment, rageful, lose your cool and do something you normally wouldn't kind of crime, at first can seem like it is an understandable type of situation. So most people can relate. They probably wouldn't do it themselves, but maybe there's a little bit more understanding there. Another thing that makes these not quite as bad or horrific or shocking as some other crimes that have happened is people that do impulsive crimes are one-timers. They murder somebody, but it's the only time that they do it. They're not habitual type of offenders doing this over and over. It's a fit of jealousy or a fit of rage that they had a one-off in their life, and that was it. Other than that, they can be normal people. You'll hear their neighbors in the interviews saying that they would never believe that they could do something like this. They are shocked that this person could do this. So when you hear about the crimes of passion or the crimes of impulse, you would typically put them low on the scale of evil, on our gradient scale that we're building. But there are certain exceptions to this. Some of the exceptions are you lost your cool and the crime that you committed was extremely horrific. What the person did was way over the top and is shocking, and that's going to nudge it up the scale a little bit. The other thing that can make these go further up the scale, these crimes of impulse, is that there may be an element of malice afterthought. They lost their cool for a second, murdered somebody, but then reality sets in of, I just did this horrible thing, now I have to cover up the crime scene. And usually this is really sloppily done, but it shows that they know what they did was wrong. Then the last thing that can nudge these further up the scale is who was the victim, because murder is subjective. It is not just because you kill somebody that everybody is going to think you're evil. If it's two grown men get into a bar brawl and one hits one with a chair and he dies, that's a whole lot different than somebody that kills a small woman or a child in a fit of rage. We would typically say that one is worse or more evil or more horrific than the other, and then of course the way that the crime is perpetrated is going to come into play as well. So for this particular category of crime, it's broken down into two different factions of perpetrators. One is the impulsive crime, that's a murderous rampage, jealousy, or rage. The next one will be the crimes of impulse with a little bit of an antisocial personality trait to the person. So, to begin, we will start with our first case. We'll begin with the story of Jeremy Akers. He's an A-plus student. He's a bodybuilder, lifting weights all the time. He's an overachiever in everything that he does. Everything has to be perfect in his life. But there's another side to his personality. He's very hot-tempered, easy to anger, and a very macho, manly type of character. Along with that, he can become jealous and possessive very, very quickly, especially in his personal relationships, from what we know about him anyway. And he ends up meeting and marrying Nancy Richards. What we know about Nancy Richards, she's a very wealthy Northeasterner. Her family had money. She's a writer, she's a novelist and a poet. She has 3 children with Jeremy, and after the birth of the 3rd child, he began to ridicule her, calling her fat and telling her that she wasn't good enough for him. So she gets down to her body weight that she had before she had the baby and gets plastic surgery trying to please her husband, but that doesn't work out. They never really reconcile the relationship to what it was before, and she meets Jim Lemke, who is also a writer, and begins to have an affair with him. So Jim moves in, and Jeremy becomes suspicious. He starts to find out that this affair is going on. He hires a private investigator and gets the evidence that he needs. And to make matters worse, Nancy is just done. She asks him for a divorce. And he's not going to have that. He wants this relationship to be reconciled, and he begs her to give him another chance and to start over and to do all of that. So he lures her to the house to discuss the terms of the divorce, how it's going to go down, and probably to beg her to reconcile again. But then he ends up shooting her in the car, and then shortly afterward kills himself. This is our basic love triangle, jealousy type of murder. Now we'll turn to the story of Jonathan Nyce. He's a very smart man. He's a molecular biologist. He starts a drug company, gets some venture capital to be able to work on a drug for asthma patients, and he quickly becomes a millionaire at the beginning. He starts to correspond with a lady in the Philippines. Her name is Michelle, and she's kind of in a mail order bride situation. And he goes there after corresponding with her for a while and brings her back to the United States and marries her. But the whole time he's lying. He's not being honest about who he is, about how much money he has, or that he's 10 years younger than he said that he was. He starts to have a little bit of financial trouble. The drugs that he's trying to make are not being rolled out or produced in the amount of time that he wants him to be. He's a great scientist, but he's not a very good businessman. So as he's beginning to have financial troubles, he's becoming very jealous of his much younger wife. He's trying to do things like take Viagra to keep up with her youthfulness that he just doesn't have. So he decides he's going to do things like install a gym in the house to try to keep her faithful, because he thinks that, you know, if she sees some muscular young hunk at the gym, that she's going to run off with him. After all, she's a mail order bride. So Michelle actually starts to have an affair with the gardener that she had hired to take care of the estate, because they live in a very nice house. He was wealthy from the venture capital, but that's starting to dry up. So Jonathan hires a PI, and he finds out about the affair, has pictures and the whole 9 yards with that. So Michelle's coming home late from a date that she had with the gardener, and Jonathan confronts her and in the middle of the confrontation, he smashes her skull with a baseball bat. Now, this is where he differs from just your normal love triangle, impulsive type of crime, is he immediately feels that he's done something wrong. So he picks her up and puts her in the driver's seat. I mean, she has no shoes on. It's snowing outside, so there's blood trails and footprints everywhere. He puts her in the driver's seat of the car, pushes the car down an embankment and tries to make it look like a car accident, walks up to the car and leaves footprints from the car going back to the house. He had been suffering from depression for quite a while and had seen psychiatrists and had expert testimony, and the judge is very lenient on him. So he's only going to get 5 years in prison for this type of crime. Now it's time for the story of Robert Rowe. Robert was a family man. He had a wife. Her name was Mary. They had 2 sons together. They had Bobby, who was their normal son, and then they had Chris, who was blind and deaf. And then later, they adopted a girl. Her name was Jenny. Robert is a lawyer in Brooklyn. He's got a pretty affluent lifestyle going on. And then his mom dies. And this seems to be a really tragic event in his life. She apparently didn't like him very much. She disinherited him, gave all of her earthly belongings to his brother, and then her last words to him was, "I should have aborted you like I did the others before you." So he takes up issue with this. He starts to have some dreams that his mom is telling him to kill his entire family and that he's not worth living. So he starts to go to a psychiatrist, but he's getting more and more depressed and having fits of anxiety. He gets on medication for it. But because of his deteriorating mental condition, he gets disbarred. He's not able to practice law anymore. So he starts to have financial trouble because of this. Lawyers make a lot of money. He's not making any money anymore. So he has to get a job driving a taxi cab. And due to his own negligence and carelessness, the cab gets stolen, and the placard that he paid $25,000 for to be a cabbie just loses all of that money. So there's more financial problems compounding his depression. Then his normal son, Bobby, gets diagnosed with a congenital hip disease that has the possibility of confining him to a wheelchair. So Robert just stops taking his medication and he falls into a deep, unmedicated depression. He starts to get in fights with his wife Mary. He wants to institutionalize Chris, his blind and deaf son, but she's not having any of it. She doesn't want that to happen. So he finally loses it, does this crime of impulse. He walks into the bedrooms of his children and smashes all 3 of their skulls with a baseball bat, and then waits for his wife to get home. When she gets home, he puts a blindfold on her and tells her, "Hey, I have a surprise with it for you." Well, the surprise was that he's going to smash her skull with a baseball bat as well. He kills her. This crime is expressly shocking because of the aspect of familicide. Whenever somebody kills their entire family, it's a much more shocking type of a crime, and it's usually always impulsive. Those of you that watch the documentaries that I provided to you over the break that we had know about Susan Wright. She had a sensational crime and an even more sensational court case. It was in the public for quite a while. she was married to Jeff Wright, who was not a very upstanding person in society. He had a cocaine addiction that was taking up a lot of his time and his money, and along with that came a lifestyle of strippers and escorts and women of the night, where he got an STD and he gave that STD to Susan, which would be a very upsetting experience to have the person that you're married to come home and be intimate with you and give you an STD, because you have that situation, but then you have the realization that they got the STD from somewhere, which means that infidelity is going on, and that would be a very traumatic thing to deal with. So he was also a very jealous and possessive type of person, according to interviews that were given after this crime had happened. And Susan claims a long history of abuse and domestic violence and a lot of hurtful bullying going on throughout their entire marriage. There wasn't any police reports or restraining orders or anything that documented a type of history like this. But she claims that she had to, out of desperation one night, seduce Jeff into a bondage type of situation going on in their bedroom. She got him to lay down on the bed, and she tied his wrists and ankles to all four bedposts and pulled out a knife, slashed his genitalia, and began stabbing him. Now, she stabbed him a lot. She stabbed him 193 times. At one point during this ordeal, it's making a lot of noise, one of the children was alerted and had to be put back into bed and calmed down. She went and grabbed another knife after putting the child back into their room and calming them down, and took that other knife and proceeded to continue stabbing her husband in the bedroom. So she took a break, came back, and then kept on going. After she was done stabbing him, she drug him into the backyard and buried him in a fish pond that he was digging. He had dug the hole and was in the process of constructing a waterfall pond kind of thing in the backyard, and it was a really shallow grave, so the dog very shortly after digs up the body. Now, the court case of Susan Wright, the prosecutor actually brought a bed into the courtroom. It was the bed with the blood stains on it, and the prosecutor had one of her colleagues lay down, and she acted out stabbing somebody 193 times. That's going to take a whole lot of effort, and it's going to take a lot of time, and because of the antics of the prosecution, they were not buying the battered woman's syndrome excuse for this impulsive crime. Now, there is a little bit of a premeditation in this, but not much. She did seduce him and tie him up with the intent to kill him, so that shows premeditation there, but the amount of planning was not that much, so this would still fall into a crime of passion, a crime of impulse. It's the excessive nature of it that got her convicted. She lost her appeal as well and still had to serve over 20 years in prison for the crime that she committed. These next cases are going to involve the mentally ill, and one problem with mentally ill patients is that sometimes they don't know that they are suffering from some sort of a mental deficiency or mental disease, something like schizophrenia. What's going on in your head is a real thing. The voices are really there, the hallucinations are real, and they are your truth. They are your reality. So if your reality is telling you that the people that are trying to help you are the ones that are trying to hurt you, it makes it really hard for the treatment that you're being forced to take to stick. So most people that have schizophrenia or have some sort of other type of psychotic disposition are on a roller coaster. They'll be treated for something and then they'll start to get better, and everybody around them will say that they're really great when they're on their medication, and then they'll stop taking their medication and they'll have a relapse. So they go through this revolving door with institutions to where they're doing better and then they're doing worse, and they're doing better and they're doing worse. And sometimes that environment, that type of lifestyle that they're going through, creates a very fertile soil for violence to happen. Now, that's the story with Joshua Webb. He was in a revolving door situation with treatment. He had schizophrenia, and one day he just snapped, and in a crime of impulse he killed his mother and he killed his dog. Now, that's not that big of a stretch of the imagination or horrific type of crime, but what he did after the murder made it so that he got a lot of public notoriety, and people were horrified by what happened because he decapitated his mother, and for some reason he walked to the grocery store with his mother's severed head, and he's holding the head, walks into the store and begins to start stabbing a grocery clerk that was working there. So a bunch of customers got a hold of him, subdued him, called the police. He was arrested. Experts found him to be extremely schizophrenic, and the jury found him guilty except for insanity. Sometimes it's drug use that causes mental illness to become prevalent. And with the story of Daniel Rakowitz, that is exactly what happens. He is a stoner. He is a big-time marijuana user. He swears by it. He loves it. He calls himself the Lord of Marijuana. He has what's called marijuana-induced schizophrenia. He's fine when he's not smoking, but once he starts to abuse marijuana, then his mind starts to hallucinate. He starts to hear voices. He has paranoid delusions, all of the classic symptoms of schizophrenia. So he calls himself 966 because while he was smoking, he believes that 3 lords flew out of a wall and gave him a vision. This was in 1966, and told him that he was a god over everybody else. When he was younger, he was known to kill and torture small animals, which is a definite sign of psychopathic tendencies in anybody, but when you put the marijuana or drug use on top of that, then it exacerbates it and makes it that much worse. So he started a cult among all of the homeless people in Thompson Square Park in New York, and he wanted to have followers to follow his religion of marijuana use. So he moved in with a dancer, Monica Beerle. She was a ballerina. She worked as a go-go dancer and a stripper. But he would not leave the apartment after things kind of soured. So they got into a fight. He refused to leave. It kept on going for several weeks. She couldn't get him out of the house. So it finally comes to a boiling point, and he punches her in the throat during their last argument. And after he does that, she falls down and she never wakes up. She's dead. So he needs to get rid of the body somehow. So he gets as stoned as he can, and he completely dissects her body. He throws a tarp into the bathtub, starts cutting her up into little pieces and boiling all of the parts of her body. He boiled her head as well. Got all the meat off, and it's said that he made soup for the homeless followers of his cult and his religion. So he would go out and feed the homeless with the soup he made from her body. Then he put the bones and put the skull and everything that was left over from the process into a bucket of kitty litter and went down to the bus station and checked the bag into the bus station that had the bucket of kitty litter in it and got his baggage claim ticket and lost it. That's where it stayed until the police came and picked it up. So that concludes our first look at crimes of impulse, or crimes of passion, things that just happen spur the moment. So now, after hearing all of this, do you know the reasons behind some of these things? Do you relate with the love triangle or the jealousy type of murders? Is there some sort of rationale in what they did with those? Are they any worse than the mentally ill people that don't realize what's going on, that are suffering from a mental illness? Which one of those do you think is a worse crime? Which one is more evil? Is there any rationale that would make it so that a person would want to kill their entire family? Just spur the moment, snap one day. Does it make it worse because it was children that died? How did the public perceive all of this? Is the case of familicide worse than Daniel Rakowitz and boiling somebody's head? I don't know. That's for you to decide and to debate. Next, we'll do the antisocial crimes of impulse.